Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thanks for joining us on this special edition of Newsmakers. I'm Fred Martino. El Paso Electric is appealing its request for a rate increase to the New Mexico Supreme Court, and an out-of-state company wants to purchase the state's largest utility, PNM. That and much more this week with Steve Fischmann, District 5 representative on the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. Steve, great to have you with us, and I'm not going to bury the lead here. You know, a lot of folks watching this show are most interested in what I just mentioned about El Paso Electric, that they're appealing their proposed rate hike request to the New Mexico Supreme Court. The Public Regulation Commission, of which you are a member, a representative, there are just 5, rejected their proposed rate increase. Give us a sense of the process and the decision.
Well, the process is when a utility feels its rates need to be adjusted, they make a filing with the commission, and we study it carefully. They're very complicated. A filing is usually thousands of pages. And we try and come up with a rate that balances the amount of profit and cash flow that the utility gets with getting customers a fair rate. And El Paso Electric had been due to file for a rate case several years ago, but with the merger and other things that happened, it had been delayed. So it's been 5 or 6 years. And El Paso filed to get a fairly substantial increase in their revenue annually from New Mexico, about $6 million, I believe. And when we went through the entire process of reviewing the application, we've come back and recommended that there be a $3.5 million decrease in their total revenues.
So now we know why they're appealing, because they wanted more money. You said when you looked at the data that actually they should get less money. Give us an idea, and I realize, you know, we have a lot of questions today. We can't get into too much detail, but give us an idea in a nutshell of why you decided that.
Well, there were several areas where they appeared to be asking for a lot more money than was needed. One of the areas they're upset about is the return on equity that we granted them. So they'd asked for 10.5% return on equity. We granted them 9% return on equity. Utilities are a very safe investment. Their revenues are guaranteed, they're monopoly. A lot of their costs, if they run into problems, they get compensated from regulators to be sure that they don't lose money. So they're not very risky. And, you know, quite frankly, if you go out into the general marketplace, stocks, bonds, and go to various investment funds, they'll tell you over time, expect 7.5%. So at 9%, they're not getting a terrible deal, given that they're not very risky. But I will say it's a problem across the country that regulators, in my view, have been giving utilities and utility shareholders far more of a return than the rest of the market. And our job is to balance the needs and be fair. So at 9%, I still think we're being pretty generous, quite honestly.
Okay. That's very interesting. And we should note that Newsmakers has invited El Paso Electric CEO Kelly Tomlin to join us on the program, and we hope to have her on a future show. if she would like to be able to state her case on this. You know,
Yeah.
I found that this was really interesting. This rate case request, I got it in my utility bill. The document sent by EPE to customers, which is also available, at least at the time of this taping, on the EPE website, noted that it was requesting far different rates for different customers. A more than 12% rate hike for residential service, just a little over 3.4% for large power service, and actually a decrease of almost 6% for small general service and a reduction of almost 2% for what's called general service. Now, without commenting specifically on El Paso Electric's proposal, I'd like you to address the decision by a public utility to ask for a large increase from residential customers and then much smaller increases for businesses and others.
Well, generally, utilities will tell you that residential customers are getting subsidized by other customers. When you serve a residence, it's a small amount of power that they're using. Each one requires a separate meter, separate billing. There's distribution lines that go to those folks. They use power at peak periods, which requires the system to invest more in assets. So their feeling is that residential customers actually are paying less than their fair share.
And how does that? How do you stand on that as someone who has to regulate, make a decision on this?
Well, there's a cost accounting issue there, and they're not wrong. But I think and there's a philosophy that each customer should carry their weight. But there's also a principle that we want to protect residential customers from rate shock. And we know that so many customers in New Mexico are low income. And there's a balance again that we have to strike there. How much do you want to just have accurate cost accounting, and how much do you want to be sure you can provide affordable service? And many states allow special rates for low-income folks. New Mexico does not. So that puts a little pressure on us to try and get residential rates that don't put low-income customers in a bind.
Very interesting.
So as a commission, we really push to be sure that we don't get rate shock for those residential customers.
Yeah, of course. And of course, beyond the scope of this program, it's something we could probably do a full hour on. Businesses have many other avenues, including tax breaks, etc., that an individual would not. So as you point out, the residential customer, when they get a big increase in their electric bill, they may not have ways to offset that additional expense that a business would.
And by the way, in our final decision, we specified that no rate class can get an increase because we have an overall 3.3% decrease in revenues that we're granting EPE. So under our proposal, there would be no rate increase for residential customers.
And if the state Supreme Court rejects this case, I assume then the next step for El Paso Electric is simply to file another rate case with the commission.
Well, typically the Supreme Court would come back and say, they won't specify a resolution. They're not experts.
Right.
So they don't even try to do that. But what they will do is specify areas where we have to go back and fix a decision. You don't have to start all over again, but they'll specify where you have to fix it. There is, by the way, customers should know, oftentimes when something goes to the Supreme Court, they will stay the order, right? So the order we made for a 3.3% decrease. But if we get the order in timely, the new rates may go into effect before the Supreme Court appeal is there. That's still up in the air. What's going to happen? Will it get stayed, or will we be able to implement the changes in the rates and then have the Supreme Court consider any changes after that? So I wish I could give more certainty to folks on that, but right now I can't.
Okay. Well, Steve, as you know, we have about 27 minutes to talk today. And so a lot of other topics I want to get to. And I mentioned this in the beginning of the show. The state's largest utility, PNM, wants the PRC to approve a sale to Avangrid of Connecticut. What does the PRC have to consider in this case?
Well, in any acquisition, you want to be sure you're serving the public interest. And in approving or disapproving a proposed merger or acquisition, that's what we look at. So after the transaction occurs, is the company financially healthy enough to be sure we can, give continued strong service? Is there a record of good management that we can feel comfortable that just from a management standpoint, they will be up to the task? Are there financial risks attached with the corporate structure that might come into play? Do they have an investment strategy that we feel is consistent with the economic development arc of the state? So all those things come into play.
Okay, so a lot of different topics, a lot of possibilities. Some have noted that Avangrid subsidiaries have experienced poor reliability. Is this something that the PRC can take into account?
Yeah, and it's been a matter of some controversy. The hearing examiner, who is going through the most detail on this case and is collecting and hearing the evidence, has been a little frustrated because, quite frankly, when this information about performance of subsidiary was requested previously, we didn't hear anything about the troubles in other jurisdictions with their subsidiaries. And so that's certainly something we have to take into account, and it's troubling. One of the things you also look at is, do you feel that you're dealing with an honest business partner? And so certainly that's going to be something we look at, is, are we hearing the true story up front, and can we rely on it? Millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people at PNM depend on that service, and we need to know we have a reliable partner.
Interesting. You mentioned a hearing examiner. I found in my research preparing for this conversation today that a New Mexico hearing examiner expressed concern over $25 million in penalties assessed to Avangrid subsidiaries in the Northeast. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't want to comment too much on a case going forward, but I can say it's public record that the hearing examiner felt this information should have come out much earlier, and that it was requested and it didn't. The penalties that they have come from several states, not just one, and from several subsidiaries. So clearly that's a concern in terms of the final decision that we might make. But there's a lot of other issues. I mean, there's claims that because it's a renewable energy company that it's going to help push renewables more quickly. There's lots of arguments from different parties, pro and con, on that. Is that really true? Another issue that's being heavily debated in the case is, since Avangrid is a producer or a developer of wind and solar farms, would they give themselves an advantage over other sellers of energy in terms of providing energy to PNM? So is there a potential conflict of interest? that could cost consumers money. So all those issues come into play.
So the proposed Avangrid purchase of PNM highlights another interesting issue. Some might have been stunned when opening the Sunday Albuquerque Journal to see multiple full-page ads promoting the Avangrid purchase. There have also been countless letters to the editor from out of state defending the purchase of PNM. And my question to you, I mean, is big money, in your view, too much of an influence on something that really should simply be decided in the public interest?
Yes. The answer is yes. And but this is typical in any big investment that requires government approval. There's lots of campaigning that goes on, which is quite frankly irrelevant to the facts of the case. As a regulator, I have to treat that, and I'm the chair of the commission, and I encourage other commissioners to treat all that as noise. Our job is to create a record, get the legal facts, and decide based on what's in the best interest of the public.
Okay. You have another issue that you're looking at. Speaking of the best interest of the public, the PRC has to decide how much utilities may charge for increased prices of natural gas during that February winter storm that wreaked havoc, especially in Texas. Explain that process for us, how you do that.
Well, first of all, where there are contracts and by law, fuel costs are a pass-through cost. So when the cost goes up, and this is another reason for investors, utilities are so safe, when a cost goes up for fuel, they're obligated to pay it, and ratepayers are obligated to pay the utility for that upcharge. So a normal business, they could take a big loss because they can't just raise prices through the roof, but a utility is perfectly protected. So that's okay. In El Paso Electric's case, it's very interesting because there was a contract with Palo Verde Nuclear, the nuclear generating station, Palo Verde 3, and the contract was they'd overbuilt, and a long time ago EPE was going to get it and put it on rate base, but it was so overbuilt that the commission said no. Let's set a proxy price and you can sell it to us as a contractor. But we're not going to be on the hook to be part owner of this facility. And that contract price is based on the market price of electricity at Palo Verde Hub, which is impacted by gas prices. So there's this interesting situation where there was not a penny of extra cost to El Paso Electric, but their contract price to that they charge consumers goes up because the gas price really peaked. So there's about $6.8 million there that's a windfall for El Paso Electric. And right now there's a case in process at the commission to determine the status of the contract. Does El Paso Electric indeed deserve the $6.8 million windfall? Are they legally entitled? And you can imagine the lawyers are going crazy over this. So it's an interesting situation.
Very interesting. Another interesting thing, there's so much to talk about today. In January of 2023, the commission, the PRC, will transition from a 5-person elected body to a 3-person appointed group. Your thoughts on this?
Pros and cons. So I'd be the first to tell you, in terms of commissioners, elected commissioners, understanding their jobs and understanding what is a lot of very technical work, quite frankly. Legally technical, financially technical. And there's been problems with elected commissioners not understanding the issues well enough to be good decision makers. And that's what generated this whole constitutional amendment to change it. But you flip the coin, and one of the other problems is you go to 3 people appointed and appointed by politicians. There's lots of room for political influence in the decisions that those appointed folks make. Now, there's safeguards to be sure that they're technically competent, but the question then becomes, are they truly neutral and objective in their decision making, or are those political appointments with folks who might succumb to political pressure to make decisions?
Yeah, and of course, Steve, we've talked about this in terms of other state positions, and this includes elected positions like state representatives, state senators, appointments by the governor to be a secretary of a department. We don't have any rule in New Mexico where if you're in one of those positions, you can't then resign or end your elected service and go work for the very people you were regulating. And as you know, we've had that situation where an environment secretary or someone who was regulating the environment for the governor, Susana Martinez, ended up going to work for the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association.
Well, revolving door is a huge issue for utility regulation as well. And many of the lawyers and technical folks that now work for utilities used to work at the commission. And many of the commission employees used to work for utilities. And there's a little bit of a bubble there that you'd like to be able to break. It gets incestuous, and it truly is an issue. How to fix it, I don't know, because there's not a ton of qualified people in New Mexico to take a lot of these positions. I do believe there are ways that we can address it, but it's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. Well, of course, this change means that you may not be on the board when your elected term ends. What are your priorities beyond what we've talked about so far?
Well, New Mexico is committed to a transition to renewables, which is terrific. And I'm very committed to renewables, and I think we've been far too shy in the past. And before the law was passed, the commission was way too shy in terms of embracing renewables. I think the big issue going forward is not going to be whether we do them, it's going to be who walks away with the money after we do it. And I have to say that I've seen a lot of deal structures put forward that take a lot of the financial rewards and cost savings that come from moving to renewables and put them in the hands of people that already have plenty of money. And we have to be sure as a commission that we come up with financial structures and technical structures that protect rates. I will say there are a lot of environmental groups who've been tremendous in pushing this issue along, and it's been great for the state in that respect. I make no secret of the fact that when it comes to the finances and who gets the money, that sometimes they back away way too soon. And we can have cheap power and clean power, and we don't need to make a lot of fat cats fatter.
All right. Well, I'm quickly running out of time. This is not before the PRC, but it's a question that some might raise. You've talked about this already today. Public utilities essentially are a monopoly. I can't shop for an electric provider like I might choose one retailer over another to buy milk. Yet it seems that every time I open the newspaper or watch commercial TV, I see my electric bill money paying for advertising to tell me how great my electric company is. Should this be allowed?
Well, theoretically, that advertising doesn't go on to your consumer bill. It's paid from a separate account.
Yeah.
But the way money works, I think that's kind of a fiction.
Yeah.
It's fungible. the second issue is, for me, is donations that they make to local groups. And utilities buy a lot of goodwill and a lot of support for things that might not be particularly good for consumers because they've essentially bought goodwill with donations. And frankly, I think utilities should not be making donations. Advertising should always be public service. How can you save money, or do we have a program that can help you? They shouldn't be allowed to donate to politicians because they only exist because politicians created the monopoly for them. And that's very incestuous. And there was a ton of money spent in my campaign when I ran by utilities to defeat me. And a lot of money they give to PACs, and a lot of potential dark money. And quite frankly, as really almost quasi-governmental. Their utility, the government protects all their financial interests. None of that should be happening. And I wish I could convince more people who are policymakers to share my view on that, but no luck so far.
Well, Steve, we always enjoy talking to you. I'm sure as your term continues on the Public Regulation Commission, we'll have a chance to talk again as some of these decisions work their way through. In the case of the El Paso Electric rate case, the New Mexico Supreme Court, and in the case of other things, maybe more work before the commission.
Well, Fred, I appreciate the great work you do for Las Cruces, and I'll be happy to come on anytime.
You take care of yourself, and again, thank you for being here. This is what elected service is all about, being transparent and talking about these issues that affect each and every one of us. So we appreciate it very much. That is our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio every weekday. It's morning edition from 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News, always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.